So, I'm going to start off with a line of poetry. Who knows that food on the plate, how toiling every grain is? It sounds just a little off, right? Well, this is a line of poetry that I saw at a flower show that I went to just this past spring break with my grandmother. And next to the exhibits, instead of descriptions on plaques, there were poems. And a lot of them were traditional Chinese poems translated into English, like this one. The Chinese version of this line is much more poetic. 水之盤中酸，粒粒皆辛苦. And when I pointed out to my grandmother how cringy and weird the English translation was, she told me, Lauren, this is why you have to learn and appreciate Chinese poetry, because one character contains so many layers of meaning that an English translation just cannot capture. And this experience led me to better reflect and rethink my relationship and appreciation for Chinese, which is a language that I grew up with. 22% of the American population is multilingual, in comparison to over half of the world's population. This statistic is shocking to me, growing up speaking Cantonese, Mandarin, and English in a biliterate and trilingual Hong Kong. So in this talk, I'm going to explain to you why I think that everyone should have the experience of learning and speaking multiple languages. So first, a little bit of background on where I grew up. In Hong Kong, Chinese and English are the official languages. On the streets, you'll hear two dialects of Chinese, Cantonese and Mandarin, as well as English. You'll also hear a lot of Tagalog, Indonesian, and other Asian and European languages from the large immigrant population there. Cantonese is the most spoken language, and most people speak it as their usual spoken language. But a majority of the population can speak English and Mandarin as well. People who speak English, Cantonese, and Mandarin in Hong Kong fulfill their local, national, and international linguistic needs. First, Cantonese is the local language. It is the most spoken language in the city, and it is the 19th most spoken language in the world, with over 85 million speakers. And then Mandarin. That's the national language. Hong Kong is geographically connected to the Chinese mainland and functions under China's one country, two systems policy. Mandarin is also the second most spoken language in the world, with the largest native-speaking population of 1.1 billion people. And then, English is the international language. It is the most spoken language in the world, with over 1.5 billion speakers, and most people speak it not as their native tongue, as English speakers come from over 140 countries. And so, this creates a biliterate and trilingual phenomenon in Hong Kong, or 兩文三語 in Cantonese. On the streets of Hong Kong, you'll see traditional Chinese scripts and English scripts together, and menus and street signs, as you can see on the screen. Hong Kong's style of Cantonese is also particularly special because it is heavily influenced by English when the British colonized Hong Kong over a century ago. You'll hear people say hello and bye-bye for hello and goodbye. For the English word ball, instead of saying the Chinese qiu in Mandarin, you'll hear people saying Cantonese ball, which much more closely resembles ball in English. And so you might ask, Lauren, if Cantonese and Mandarin are both Chinese, why would you consider them two separate languages? Well, that's because Cantonese is mutually unintelligible from Mandarin, meaning if you grew up speaking Mandarin, you will not be able to immediately recognize and understand Cantonese as well. And this is because Cantonese has 9 tones in comparison to Mandarin's 4. Although they have relatively similar sentence structures, a lot of the words and pronunciations are different. And one of the most common examples of this is how you say thank you. In Cantonese, if you're thanking someone for a favor or a service, you would say "goi." But if you're thanking someone for a gift or a compliment, you would say "多謝." But in Mandarin, it's just "xie xie." And so that's Hong Kong for you. You can learn a lot about a city and a culture just by examining its languages. And likewise, you can learn a lot about a person based on the languages that they speak. And so I present to you my life story. When I was young, my parents grew up speaking to me in Cantonese and English. The preschool I went to really emphasized biliteracy and trilingualism. And then I switched to a local elementary school in first grade. And a lot of my classes were conducted in English, so I learned it in a really formal academic setting. I spoke Cantonese to my friends, and I also took one Mandarin class a week with a non-native speaker. And then I switched to an international middle school in 6th grade. All my classes and daily conversations were conducted in English. And at that point, I could tell you what the present participle tense was, I could tell you what the past perfect tense was, but I couldn't talk to you about why I liked listening to One Direction or to talk to you about my feelings. And that's because I never really had to use English in a casual setting for a prolonged amount of time. And then in Chinese class, instead of learning in Cantonese, I was learning in Mandarin. And because of the differences I illustrated previously between the two languages, I would often get them confused. And so at that point in time, I was insecure with my English, embarrassed by my Cantonese, and so at home, I only spoke to my parents in English, taking for granted the fact that they would understand me. And English became my primary language. And then I came to Choate, and my relationship with language changed. I met many different people with different relationships with the languages that they spoke, and it made me reevaluate my own. I came to a fork in the road. I asked myself, what role will these three languages play in my life? And instead of having to choose one path to go down, I've learned how all three can coexist at the same time. When I call home, I speak to my parents in Cantonese and my family in Cantonese, and at school, I speak to the large Chinese-speaking population in Mandarin, and I also gossip with them in Mandarin, but that's that. And then I speak English when I'm in the classroom and experiencing the joy of communicating with the wonderful people here. And so far, my past experience has really influenced my relationship with language. And this journey with language is continually evolving, but so far has been enriching and rewarding. Being able to speak Chinese has allowed me to connect with my culture, from being able to say Chinese greetings to food names and playing mahjong. I've also been able to connect with my family more by speaking Cantonese. All four of my grandparents speak fluent English, but they were taught in British colonized Hong Kong by missionaries, so in a very formal way. And when I speak to them in Cantonese, I get to see their fun and casual side. And I love hearing the slang that they use in dinner table conversations. And one of my favorites is hum balang, which roughly translates to all of it. And I remember when I was young, my brother and I would parade around the house yelling hum balang because it's just so fun to say. And then as a music connoisseur, I've been able to understand and resonate more deeply with artists. Not that you have to understand the lyrics of a song to enjoy it, but I feel that I've been able to connect with the emotions that the artist is trying to portray. And I have to admit that I didn't really listen to a lot of Chinese music before coming to Choate. But once I did, I've been able to connect more with the students here who grew up listening to this same music. And I still remember Lunar Banquet when one of my favorite songs, Tonghua, came on, and we were all belting and smiling together. And so, in a community where another language is dominant, sharing a language with someone is an instant bridge between two strangers. And then, being able to understand another language also helps us to experience literature without translation. And remember that poem at the beginning? There are also some words that are simply untranslatable, and one of my favorite Cantonese words is yi hei, which roughly translates to heaty. But it describes a category of foods that give you a sore throat, like chocolate or chips and even lychee fruit. But that excludes ice cream and marshmallows and things like that. And that's just really hard to describe in English without using the Chinese word yi hei. From my Latin 350 class, I've also been able to read a lot of Cicero and Ovid, and I've been able to learn about the hearts, lives, and legends of ancient Romans. Being able to understand religious texts in another language can also be very valuable. You could read the Quran in Arabic or the Torah in Hebrew as well. Being multilingual also has a lot of neurological benefits. Research has shown that the constant workout of switching between multiple languages strengthens your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is in charge of executive function and memory and switching between tasks and focusing. Being multilingual also increases the volume of gray matter in your brain, as you can see here in red. And the gray matter contains a lot of the brain's neurons and synapses and is in charge of memory and movement, among other things. But up to the 1950s, research has not shown the benefits of multilingualism, and scientists had argued that bilingual children would become confused and their development would be hindered both socially and psychologically. But more research recently has shown that children who are bilingual can think more flexibly, efficiently, and creatively. And so, given the social and psychological benefits of being multilingual, students must begin learning languages at a young age. And at a young age, the critical period hypothesis states that a person has a native-like proficiency in acquiring a second language, and that's because they use implicit memory in language acquisition. And with implicit memory, they're unconsciously picking up that the language that they see in daily life and communication. So if they want to say something in the future, like, I will eat an apple, they'll say that instead of, I ate an apple, which is different. For me, for example, I learned Latin past my critical period. And so I use explicit memory and language learning instead. So I have to be consciously aware of the information that I'm using and absorbing. And so I need to be constantly aware of my tense. If not, I will pee would become I peed, and that's not good. And so, given these neurological benefits, these have to start in schools. We need to start normalizing multilingual education in schools. However, the current American education system and household are both effectively raising monolingual children. And this stems from xenophobic and racist sentiments that have particularly been exacerbated during the Second World War. But I want to question today, does it have to be this way? People who want to learn their mother tongue, whether to learn about their own heritage or to learn about another culture, should have the ability to do so. And countries like Singapore are currently doing this. In Singapore, the official languages are English, Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil. And 75% of the literate population in Singapore is multilingual. And this is largely because of the mother tongue education system, which requires all elementary and middle school students to pick one of the 4 languages to learn throughout their schooling based on their ethnicity and heritage. If we in the US can move away from English being the superior language, we can better empathize and understand one another. In Switzerland, there is a need for intercultural communication across languages. In Switzerland, there are German, French, Italian, and Romansh-speaking cantons. And in Zurich, a German-speaking canton, students learn 6 languages over their 12 years of schooling. They speak Swiss German to each other, and in class, they learn German, French, Italian, English, and Latin. And likewise, the US is a linguistically diverse society. English, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, Tagalog, Arabic, and French all have over 1 million speakers. And so in the US, we also need to normalize multilingualism because there is a need for intercultural communication. So for this, I propose a 3-pronged solution. Number 1, reduce stigma against learning a different language. Many immigrant families feel the pressure not to pass on their mother tongue because they feel like they need to assimilate and that it is un-American. However, we need to normalize multilingualism by creating diverse environments for students to grow up in through connection with immigrant communities or immersion programs. We can also foster curiosity for multilingualism through the media and social media as well, as it is a common platform where students get their information. Number 2, create a robust early learning program that suits students' needs. Through the power of early language learning, we can create a fun, comprehensive, and engaging learning program that engages imagination and play. We can create the spaces for students to dive into their heritage if they haven't had the chance to do so before schooling, and for other students to learn about other cultures and learn other languages. Finally, take advantage of technology. Yes, the current American education system is overburdened. However, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's the power of technology to connect students across spaces. While it is not necessarily feasible to have a teacher at every school to teach every language, there can be an online platform to group students together based on skill level and target language so that they can simulate the classroom learning environment as well. At Choate, we exist on a spectrum of multilingualism. We have different combinations of the languages that we speak at home, in the classroom with friends, and in the language classroom in Steele Hall. Language can show a lot about a person and a place. And all these elements make up our linguistic persona and, in turn, our overall identity. I urge you today to think about how we can push and expand our culture of multiculturalism and multilingualism by appreciating, valuing, and understanding other languages. How can we take advantage of study abroad opportunities and the language program to do so? And in the US, we can become a more inclusive nation by instituting a multilingual early language learning program modeled after successful countries like Singapore and Switzerland. And that way, everyone can experience the magic and joy of being multilingual. Thank you.